It's shallower than I thought. What a letdown, my mother-in-law sneered as she pushed me into the pond. I had endured her cruel antics for so long, but in that moment, something inside me snapped. My name is Jasmine. I'm 30 years old and have been a stay-at-home wife for 7 years. I live with my husband Gordy, who is 8 years older than me, our 6-year-old daughter, and Gordy's mother. Gordy was my boss, and I was his subordinate. Growing up, my parents divorced, and I lived with my mom. I guess I always yearned for a father figure. Gordy, being older and competent at his job, seemed very appealing, but I never had a chance to get close to him. He was just someone I admired from afar. However, during a team-building event, we bonded over our shared love for movies and hit it off. We started dating, and I fell head over heels for the mature and kind Gordy. About 6 months into our relationship, I found out I was pregnant. We hadn't discussed marriage yet, so I was more shocked than happy. I was anxious about how Gordy would react, but I couldn't keep it a secret forever. I mustered the courage and told him. To my surprise, he was thrilled and suggested we get married. I was overjoyed by Gordy's reaction. When I told my mom, she was a bit surprised but happy for me. My mom raised me as a single mother after my parents divorced due to my father's affair. I was only 2 at the time, so I barely remember my father. My mom worked tirelessly from dawn till dusk to raise me. Being an only child, dinner alone was lonely. But I didn't want to burden my mom. Even though she was busy, she showered me with love, and we have a great relationship. I always thought that when I got married, I didn't want my child to feel lonely. I wanted to build a warm home, so I was determined to have a loving marriage and family. Things moved quickly, and we introduced each other to our families. Gordy had lost his father at a young age and lived with his mother. The first time I met her, she was kind, but I sensed something off in her occasional cold expression. However, she was the woman who gave birth to Gordy, so I brushed off my concerns, thinking she was just nervous. We had a simple wedding with just our families. I was getting the hang of my job and wanted to work until my due date. But Gordy insisted I become a housewife, so I quit. My mom suggested I take maternity leave instead of quitting, but Gordy disagreed. He said his mother was a dedicated housewife, and he wanted the same for me, so I became a housewife. After our marriage, at Gordy's insistence, we moved in with his mother. That's when my nightmare began. I initially found comfort in having an experienced mother around, but I was naive. My mother-in-law seemed resentful, as if I had stolen her precious son. Her attitude changed completely after our marriage, and she started to torment me. Yes, my initial instincts about her were right. As for Gordy, after our marriage, he became controlling and emotionally abusive. Apparently, his late father had been a dominant figure, and neither Gordy nor his mother could defy him. Mother-in-law was not allowed to work or even go out without permission. If Gordy showed any defiance, he was beaten and berated. Their father's authority was absolute. They endured this together, and when Gordy's father passed away from an illness when Gordy was 22, they celebrated. After that, they lived happily as a duo. I believe the kind Gordy I knew before our marriage was genuine, but after seeing his mother's disdain for me, his love waned. To Gordy, his mother was more important than his wife. Whenever Gordy was cold or verbally abusive to me, mother-in-law looked satisfied. Gordy would appease her, saying, "Mother, I'm married so you can have an easier life. Jasmine will do everything for you." I think the two of them felt some twisted sense of revenge by treating me the way Gordy's father had treated them. It was utterly unfair to me, but I felt helpless. In the early days of our marriage, I suffered from severe morning sickness, sometimes unable to get out of bed. Yet mother-in-law would say, "You're exaggerating this morning sickness thing. Who do you think you are? Get up and make dinner." She even forced me to do household chores. She would make me carry heavy bags and even intentionally push me once. Gordy, of course, didn't defend me. Instead, he would say, "I'm busy working. You're probably just napping all day and you still eat the food I provide." I endured, hoping that maybe when our child was born, mother-in-law and Gordy would change. My mom, concerned about me living with mother-in-law and being pregnant, often called or messaged, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. She had raised me through hardships and always wished for my happiness. I didn't want to worry or sadden her. I always reassured her with a cheerful voice, saying everything was fine, that Gordy and mother-in-law were taking good care of me, and that I was happy. She might have suspected something but always said, "Remember, I'm on your side. Tell me if anything's wrong." Then I safely gave birth to a beautiful girl named Judith. The joy of her birth made me momentarily forget the torment from mother-in-law and Gordy. I vowed to live for Judith from that day on. My mom offered to take care of me postpartum at her home, but mother-in-law, with a smile, said, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of Judith here," denying me the chance to return to my parents. Normally, new mothers rest for a month after childbirth, but my mother-in-law had me working the day after I was discharged. Their treatment of me didn't change after Judith's birth. It got worse. Knowing I was up all night nursing, they still forced me to wake up early for chores. On top of that, I had to care for the baby. I was utterly exhausted, stressed, and sleep-deprived. Mother-in-law, seeing my worn-out state, would laugh, saying I looked like a vagrant. Every night, tears streamed down my face. Judith was my only solace. The one saving grace was that Judith looked like Gordy, so both he and mother-in-law adored her. Though their idea of adoring was just playing with her occasionally, I was relieved because I had feared they might mistreat Judith too. When Judith was about 3, I told Gordy I wanted to work outside. He scoffed, saying, "Who would hire someone like you with hardly any work experience?" Mother-in-law laughed, calling me a useless wife. In truth, I was at my limit and wanted to save money to leave with Judith, but they wouldn't let me work, and I gave up on ever leaving. Who would hire someone with so little experience? I had no money of my own, and for Judith's sake, I realized I had to endure. From then on, no matter how mother-in-law and Gordy treated me, I bore it all for my beloved daughter Judith. Even after 7 years of marriage, mother-in-law and Gordy remained the same. The only change was in Judith. From around age 4, she would sadly watch me being mistreated. When we were alone, she would hug me and say, "Mommy, just bear it a little longer. When I grow up, I'll protect you." Ever since she was little, Judith could sense the unfair treatment I endured, and it deeply hurt her young heart. Her presence alone became my beacon of hope. With mother-in-law and Gordy keeping a close watch, I couldn't freely go out. Even on the rare occasions I went shopping, mother-in-law would accompany me. However, once Judith started attending elementary school, I got the chance to step outside with just her during drop-offs and pickups. Previously, I couldn't even meet my own mother, but sometimes she would wait near the school to see us. So our meetings became more frequent. Whenever we met, my mom would ask, "Are you okay?" I couldn't tell her the truth about my situation, so I always replied, "I have Judith, I'm happy." I had also told Judith to keep our real situation a secret from my mom. Then one day, Judith expressed a desire to visit a community park a bit far from our home. She had heard from friends about a pond there with a family of turtles and was eager to see them. Gordy, being the doting father, said, "If Judith wants to go, I'll take her anywhere," so it was decided that we would visit the park on his next day off. Of course, mother-in-law would come along. The day of our trip to the community park arrived. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare sandwiches for the entire family. Making sandwiches took time since Gordy and mother-in-law had big appetites. While I was busy with preparations, the two of them were leisurely playing on their phones. Upon reaching the community park, it was evident that it was a popular spot bustling with families. We quickly headed to the pond to see the turtles, and sure enough, there was a cute family of turtles. Judith was ecstatic, exclaiming, "So cute." I smiled, watching her joy. Suddenly, someone forcefully pushed me from behind, and I fell into the pond. I had a traumatic experience of nearly drowning in the ocean as a child, so I was terrified of water and couldn't swim. Mother-in-law knew this because I had shared the story before. Thrown into the pond, panic overtook me as I flailed around. Judith cried out, "Mommy." Mother-in-law remarked, "Falling into a pond? What a foolish daughter-in-law," and laughed without trying to help. Gordy, laughing, took photos of me in the pond. Seeing their reactions, something inside me snapped. Fortunately, the pond wasn't too deep, and I managed to stand. Mother-in-law, seeing I was okay, said with a hint of disappointment, "It's surprisingly shallow." What a pity. At that moment, I was certain mother-in-law had pushed me. That night, anger kept me awake. I wanted revenge, but considering Judith's future, I thought it might be better to endure and stay with a financially stable Gordy. I spent the entire night thinking. The next morning, on our way to school, Judith turned to me with determination and said, "Mommy, it's okay. Divorce daddy. Grandma and daddy are terrible. I'm on your side. I was touched but hesitant, wondering if divorce was really the right choice. The following day, as we approached the school, I saw my mom. Judith ran to her with joy. I hurried over, curious about their conversation. My mom hugged me, saying, "Why didn't you tell me the truth? You have endured so much." Judith whispered, "Mommy, it's okay, right? I told Granny everything." Mom encouraged me, saying, "Get a divorce. It's okay, you're still young, and you can try again." She then went on to say, "You should hire a lawyer. I'll pay for the lawyer's fees." I'm sorry I didn't notice. From that day, with Judith's help, I began gathering evidence. Gordy's verbal abuse, mother-in-law's derogatory comments, everything was recorded. Unaware of this, mother-in-law and Gordy continued their behavior. Gordy's constant belittling and my mother-in-law's endless insults were all caught on my voice recorder. Unaware of this, both Gordy and mother-in-law continued their hurtful ways. Sometimes I would intentionally tell Gordy, "I want to work outside," to which he would reply, "Who would hire someone like you, idiot?" I would also act sad in front of mother-in-law just to hear her say, "You look so down." Pathetic. With these tactics, I gathered plenty of evidence. Then one day, mother-in-law, who never cared about her salt intake despite her age, suffered a stroke due to high blood pressure and became paralyzed. She was discharged from a hospital, but both Gordy and mother-in-law expected me to take care of her. "Jasmine, you'll take care of me, right? I am so pitiful." "Hey Jasmine, take care of mother. If you're rough with her, you'll regret it," Gordy demanded. I firmly replied, "I won't look after mother-in-law. She's your mother, Gordy. You take care of her." I had never talked back before, so they were momentarily stunned. But Gordy quickly yelled, "You better take care of her." The next day, Gordy left for work. I had no intention of caring for mother-in-law. I planned to ignore her completely. While I was in the living room, I heard mother-in-law calling me from her room. She sounded frantic. I didn't want to help, but I decided to check on her. She looked pale and said, "Jasmine, I need to use the bathroom." I coldly replied, "Go ahead on your own." She cried out, "How could you? Hurry up and help me." Apparently, she had forgotten to wear her adult diapers. She then had an accident and started crying from embarrassment. Filled with a desire for revenge, I didn't help. Instead, I called Gordy's workplace. When he rushed home and saw mother-in-law, he shouted at me, "I told you to take care of her." I calmly responded, "I told you I wouldn't. Have you forgotten how you both treated me?" Mother-in-law kept repeating, "You brute. You brute." I finally handed Gordy divorce papers. He was in shock. I said, "I have had enough. I want a divorce, and of course, I'll take custody of Judith." Both mother-in-law and Gordy were yelling, but when I played the voice recordings, they froze. Gordy's morally harassing commands and mother-in-law's heartless remarks were recorded. I said, "I have all the evidence. I'm confident I would win in court." Gordy muttered, "I can't believe you recorded us." Mother-in-law still shouted, "Judith won't choose you. She won't." When Judith came home from elementary school, mother-in-law sweetly asked, "Judith, who do you want to live with, Grandma or Mommy?" Judith firmly replied, "Of course, Mommy. Grandma and Daddy are always mean to Mommy. I will always live with Mommy. I hate Daddy and Grandma." The two were visibly shaken. It seemed like Gordy was really tired of being told that Judith, whom he loved so much, hated him. "Did you hear that? Judith wants to live with me. Please live peacefully together from now on." I packed my bags and left. I never returned to Gordy and mother-in-law's house. I finalized the divorce through a lawyer. According to the lawyer, Gordy couldn't care for mother-in-law, who was now paralyzed. She was placed in a nursing home, but due to her nasty attitude, no one wanted to be around her. Gordy, devastated by Judith's rejection, couldn't go to work and took a leave of absence. Now Judith, my mom, and I live together, and I'm actively job hunting. My new life is just beginning. My name is Sherry, and I am thrilled to be opening my own coffee shop. My husband Ken left his job at a restaurant to join me in this venture. After all, it was our dream to run a coffee shop together. We don't have kids yet, but this shop, which we've created through countless trials and errors, from financing to location and interior design, is our baby. We're eagerly awaiting our grand opening, the debut of our baby. One day, while we were buzzing around with preparations, we had a visitor to our place above the shop. It was Ken's mom, my mother-in-law. She's a laid-back person, accepting of our venture, and I admire her calm character and kindness so much. I hope to be such a mother-in-law when I have my own daughter-in-law. Though it was still a few days early for our grand opening celebration, she arrived with an enormous load of luggage. Surprised, Ken and I asked what had happened. She said, "I've been kicked out of Joe's house." She explained that she had been kicked out of the apartment she shared with my brother-in-law and had nowhere else to stay. She looked apologetic, her nonchalant attitude only making it harder for me. But Ken and I were both furious, not at her, but at my brother-in-law. Ken immediately called Joe. Mom showed up alone at our place saying she's been kicked out. "What's going on, Joe?" Remorseful yet firm, Joe told us, "We just can't live together. My wife and I are also starting a new business, and we don't have time to take care of Mom, who's becoming forgetful. Could you guys take care of her for a while? Once we're settled, we'll come together." Though it served his interests, we couldn't trust his words. Joe had reluctantly cared for our mother-in-law just because he was the older brother. Joe's wife wasn't very caring either. They must be having a blast after kicking her out. So I thought of a way to prevent our kind mother-in-law from feeling lonely or pitiful. "Okay, if that's what you say, Joe. Mother-in-law, you can live with us." There was no other choice. Their father had already passed away, and there were only two brothers, so there was no one else to care for her. I felt a bit imposed upon, but my mother-in-law is family to me too. I can't just not take care of her, especially since she's so kind and I love her dearly. "If you're fine with it, then I want her to stay with us too," Ken said, seemingly optimistic. Apparently, Ken was always a mama's boy, so it may actually be a good thing for him to have his mother close by. "Well, thanks, Ken. Sherry. I have to think about how I can repay you," my mother-in-law said, understanding the situation, or maybe not, and responded casually, "How about I make dinner every day?" "Oh, but you two are running a restaurant, so there's no need for me to cook, right?" "I think helping your family is a given, but if she wants to repay us, Ken and I thought about having her help at the store sometimes." "Mother-in-law, if you'd like, could you help out at the shop sometimes? Chatting with customers, making desserts, spending time like that might be enjoyable." "If it helps you too, I'd be happy to do anything," my mother-in-law agreed enthusiastically. If she saw it as just another household chore, she'd likely get used to it quickly. Anticipating this, Ken and I discussed having her help mainly with the cooking. As the conversation moved in that direction, we decided to show her the store downstairs. After going down the stairs and showing her around the ground floor cafe, introducing the opening menu, my usually slow-paced mother-in-law suddenly became clear and assertive. "Ken, Sherry, this shop won't be popular as it is. It's not too late to prepare, so start now." Ken and I were astounded by her confidence and the out-of-the-blue ideas she proposed. For example, given the current retro trend, even a newly built store should have old-fashioned interior and background music. The menu should include items that my mother-in-law used to eat when she was young, attracting both young people riding the retro wave and older customers. Moreover, since the number of candy shops in our town is decreasing, we should set up a candy corner, allowing buyers to eat inside the store and attracting families with children. All her ideas were innovative and aligned with the town's needs. They were so spot on that we had to agree. Under our mother-in-law's direction, we immediately began preparing. After she started living with us, our long-desired store opened, and a month later, we were thriving. If the store had no future, the number of customers would significantly decrease after a month. But we didn't have that worry. We had so many customers every day that there was a line. All this was thanks to our mother-in-law. "Sherry, the sandwich for table 3 is ready. Please bring it over." "Yes, coming right now. Though I'm busy, each day is fulfilling." It might have been a real blessing that my mother-in-law decided to barge into our lives when she did. But one day, an intruder disrupted our busy yet enjoyable days. It was my brother-in-law and his wife. "We live in the same town, you know. We've heard the rumors. Your business seems to be flourishing, and isn't it true that Mom is being called the beloved granny of the store?" my brother-in-law said with a sarcastic look on his face, glancing around the cafe. "Actually, we're thinking of starting our own shop too. A boba milk tea shop, which has been all the rage since last year. For that, we would love to have Mom help us out." That's why we came to pick her up. Give Mom back. Ha, Joe? What are you saying all of a sudden? I asked, stunned. Well, it was agreed from the start that she would return once we settled down. Now it's time. Come on, give Mom back. You guys have had enough of your good fortune, haven't you? It's our turn now. As if they could just take my mother-in-law back like she was some kind of lucky charm. They could say whatever they wanted, but the cafe that the three of us created was just starting to take off. The real test was still to come. We were already relying on my mother-in-law as a full-time employee. If she left us now, who would fill that gap? You can just hire part-time workers. A thriving business like yours should have no trouble attracting young workers, right? They probably work harder than an elderly woman like Mom. So Mom, let's say goodbye to Sherry and Ken and go home together. At Joe's words, my mother-in-law agreed surprisingly easily, leaving both my husband and me thrown off. Mom, you don't have to listen to Joe. You can stay where you want. And I really think it's okay to go back to Joe's place. I'm sorry for interfering, Sherry, but it was fun working with you too. Come and visit us at home sometime, she said. Without giving the impression of being taken away by force, my mother-in-law went back home with Joe and his wife. There was no time to feel wronged or bitter, but with the absence of my mother-in-law, who was like oil in our machinery, both the cafe and our home felt a bit emptier. That much was certain. Days where we forgot about time due to our business passed, and before we knew it, about half a year had gone by. The cafe was still bustling as usual, and the advice from my mother-in-law, whom we hadn't heard from since that day, had undoubtedly contributed to our success. I wondered if she was doing okay. I thought about calling her out of concern, but seeing Ken, who obviously felt abandoned by his mother and was acting sulky, I couldn't bring myself to make contact. Welcome. The atmosphere at home wasn't great, but the store opened today as always, and we had customers coming in. However, on that day, it was not a customer who opened the door of the shop but my mother-in-law, with her usual serene expression on her face. Sherry, Ken, I've missed you. Mom, what brings you here all of a sudden? Mother-in-law, we were worried about you. You never reach out. Have you been okay? In response to our barrage of questions, my mother-in-law simply smiled and repeated what she had said once before. I was kicked out of Joe's house. They asked me to help at the shop, and I did, but it seems the business has been floundering. They told me I was a nuisance, so I left and I was hoping to work with you guys again. It seemed that yet again, my mother-in-law had been driven out for a reason you wouldn't think to do to your own mother. Ken and I began to plot our revenge on Joe, but it turned out there was no need. Joe showed up on his own, looking utterly worn out. Mom, why do you keep disappearing without a word? Both me and her are struggling without you. Joe's wife, also known as her, wasn't present today. It seemed she was overseeing the shop. Joe, don't make it sound like it's my fault. You guys said you wanted to cut labor costs, so I, being your family, decided to leave first. I then understood what she meant by being kicked out. If they wanted to cut labor costs, they first dismissed the ones who could easily be let go, or my mother-in-law, who was at an age where she technically didn't need to work. That was not about you, Mom, but the part-timers, the students. We never said a word about you. Moreover, I don't want to be in your shop anymore. I don't want to jump into a sinking ship. If they asked me to finance a failing shop using my savings and pension, it'd be unbearable. Don't be like that. Come back to the shop and give us advice like you did to Ken. Didn't you say that even an old woman like you could give advice on managing the shop and that Ken and his team were very kind? We also want advice from you. It's not a big deal. No way. I helped Ken and his team because they wanted to create a coffee shop like the one I worked at when I was young. A place where the local people can relax. You're only interested in your own profits and short-term gains. That's not true. I also opened a store to sell trending desserts for the revitalization of our community. Is that really so? Young people's trends change so quickly. You're not capable of adapting to such volatile changes because you're a business novice. Besides, even if it's trendy, young people are very observant of adults and they'll naturally migrate to a better shop. Your shop might be novel and shiny, but the staff training isn't up to the mark, and customers don't seem comfortable there either. Just because you have experience working in a finance department and are good with numbers doesn't mean you can run a business. It's pathetic, Joe said, his frustration evident. My mother-in-law sighed deeply, her sorrowful expression seeming to lament her own son. In a small-town diner like this, you can't just mindlessly sell what's trendy among young folks. You failed to cater to customers' needs and couldn't captivate their hearts. I wonder if you really aspire to be in the service industry. It saddens me, especially since I used to be a waitress at a coffee shop. I just couldn't and don't want to work at your place. You should have said so from the very beginning, Joe snapped. You were quick to intervene with Ken, but with me, you just went along with things. I couldn't intervene, Joe. Your shop is targeting young people from the start, and there's nothing I, an old lady, can suggest. I don't fully understand young people's trends because of my age. I'm just an old woman who used to be a waitress. I can't live up to high expectations. Now, please stop making a scene at Ken's shop. You should go back to your place and deal with your finances. Feeling belittled by his mother, Joe finally blew up. Enough. Let's go home. If you say you only know about coffee shops, I'll change my business and make it a coffee shop. You can give me advice like you did for Ken and make me a lot of money. Joe tried to grab his mother's arm and pull her away. Ken and I stepped in, restraining Joe. It wasn't just Ken. I had also lost patience listening to the conversation. I had been holding back words I long wanted to say. There's no way someone who can't even care for his own mother can consider the needs of complete strangers. You can go home on your own and don't come to see your mother again. She is a co-worker to us, not a tool for you to make money, I said firmly. My husband threatened to call the police if Joe caused any more trouble. And with that, Joe finally left. After that, Joe and his wife, who treated my mother-in-law terribly, predictably failed in their business and ended up filing for bankruptcy. On top of that, they were sued by their part-time workers for harassment and unpaid wages, resulting in having to pay hefty compensation. Joe and his wife got divorced, and he was also sued for alimony, ending up in layers of debt. Joe, who had treated his own mother so horribly, couldn't rely on his family anymore. He would have to live and work alone, slowly paying off his debt. We heard about Joe's situation through a relative, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to care, showing no intention of throwing him a lifeline. I don't have time to worry about him. I'm going to be a grandma. I'm looking forward to taking care of my grandchild. Indeed, neither my mother-in-law nor Ken and I had the time to worry about Joe. Our shop was thriving more than ever since my mother-in-law came back, and we were blessed with our long-awaited child. Sherry, don't stress out just because it's your own shop. Work at your own pace. All of us, and our regular customers too, are most excited to see your child's face, my mother-in-law said. Thank you, mother-in-law, I replied, grateful for her support. At our wedding, my husband proudly announced, I'm going to make my wife manage with only $50 for groceries every month. The joyous and blissful atmosphere froze in an instant. I was stunned. I'm so lucky I scored myself a cheap housemaid, he added. As I realized his intention, it felt like everything was going dark before my eyes. Suddenly, a stern voice echoed throughout the venue. Is that all you wanted to say, you bastard? My father had stood up and was approaching us. My husband, condescendingly, said, Don't get cocky, old man. My husband, who was looking down on my father, had no idea what was waiting for him. My name is Sarah. I met my husband, Jack, in college. We were in the same year. We lost contact after graduation, but when we were 24, he threw a reunion party. That night, I drank a little too much and felt sick. Jack looked after me and told our classmates not to force me to drink. He had matured a lot since his wild college days and treated me really nicely and carefully, as if I were a precious gem or a princess. He confessed that he had actually liked me since we were in the same class, and that he threw the reunion because he wanted to see me again. We soon started dating, and after a few months, I moved into his apartment. When we were 25, he proposed, and we got married. It turns out Jack was the heir to a big corporation. He never boasted about it, but people often told me, wow, you've hit the jackpot. His parents, whom we met when we announced our marriage, seemed really nice, and I felt relieved. My parents were also happy about my marriage with Jack. My father, a small business owner who started his business when he was young and had his share of hardships, was probably relieved that I wouldn't have to struggle. From then on, it was fun planning our wedding together, booking the venue, and picking out my wedding dress. One day, with our wedding just a few months away, Jack said something unexpected at dinner. Sarah, Your cooking is always delicious. I think you'd do great running the house as a full-time housewife. Huh? But I was planning on working even after getting married. I was surprised. My plan was to continue working, and Jack had never once said he wanted me to quit. It's fine if you work part-time on the side while doing housework and looking after kids. I'm sure you want some pocket money too. But I've been working hard at my job this whole time, and I want to continue working full-time. I need to start training a successor for the company. Leave the money-making to me, and I'd like you to focus on being a homemaker, he said, while cheerfully munching on his dinner as if he was proud of himself for being the sole breadwinner. Jack continued, "We don't even have kids yet. Even if we do, I want to continue working. I can't put all the burden on you." "How? Why?" My persistence seemed to upset Jack, and he suddenly frowned at me. "I won't slack off on housework or raising kids, please," I found myself saying, desperately wanting to keep working. Jack responded to my words with a bright smile. "Okay, if you insist, that's fine. They say women feel uneasy when they lose connection with society. So go ahead and do your best with housework and childcare." I was relieved that he readily agreed. However, his words "do your best with housework and childcare" didn't quite sit right with me. When I talked about this with my friends, they replied, "Jack cares about you, Sarah. He's a good husband." That made me feel happy, making me feel cherished and easing my concerns. After that, we sometimes discussed our future. "Sarah, you're such a strong, independent woman who wants to continue working even after getting married. I'm glad to have a woman like you as my wife." His kind words always made me happy. I should also take part in some of the housework too. "All right, I'll handle the household accounts and hand you the living expenses, so we'll work with that expense every month." I always thought managing finances was a woman's job, so I was deeply moved when Jack offered to do it. Oh, I don't have to do everything by myself. That's a relief. And so came our wedding day. With many guests blessing us, the ceremony went smoothly, and I was overwhelmed with joy. Then an incident broke out at the end of the ceremony. "I'm going to make my wife work with only $50 for groceries every month." During his speech, Jack suddenly made this absurd statement. I was stunned, my mouth wide open in disbelief. The other guests started murmuring, and the festive mood instantly turned ice cold. "Oh, I'm so lucky to have such a cheap maid," he said, grinning at me, oblivious to the fact that he just ruined our wedding. What on earth is he talking about? I was horrified to see him change so abruptly. I never agreed to such an absurd thing as $50 a month for groceries. "You agreed when I said I'll manage the finances, didn't you?" "Huh? Well, yes," I stammered. I couldn't believe that this was his plan all along. I blanked out, suddenly realizing that he might have been deceiving me all this time. "I let my wife say she wants to do all the housework and childcare," he continued. "While working full-time, I'm sure she'll be able to handle all the chores perfectly and make nutritious, filling meals for just $50 a month." Jack continued to spout nonsense. Hearing this, I quickly covered his mic with my hand. "Don't just say whatever you want. I won't accept this." "What's wrong?" "Didn't I tell you to do your best with the housework and childcare?" he responded. "Aren't you supposed to help out too?" "I never said anything like that. We can't live together like this," I argued. Suddenly, Jack's expression changed, and with a terrifying look in his eyes, he whispered in my ear, "We're bound by this ceremony. It's too late to cancel the marriage now, right? We've already turned in our marriage certificate. Do you really want to get divorced? You're threatening me? Quit messing with me." I never thought I would argue with Jack, to whom I'd pledged my future on what should have been the best day of my life. Filled with regret and anger, I felt my face heat up and tears well up in my eyes. This is what I signed up for. I can't believe I'm going to be misused like a servant by this man. I now deeply regretted marrying Jack. Just then, someone abruptly stood up from their seat and approached us. "Is that all you wanted to say, you bastard?" It was my father, Robert. His temples were throbbing and his gaze was intense. I could tell he was infuriated on my behalf. "How dare you treat someone's daughter like this in front of her parents?" The tone in his voice froze the already tense atmosphere in the venue. Our wedding guests held their breath, watching the stare down between my father and Jack. "What's your problem? Don't get so cocky," Jack retorted, looking down on my father with an evil expression I had never seen before, which made me shiver. "My father is the president of a major corporation, and I'm his successor. A small business owner of a company I've never even heard of shouldn't act all high and mighty. When I introduced my father to Jack, he praised my father, saying he was a great man despite the fact that his company was small. He even told me, "I fell in love with you, and your family background won't change my feelings for you." In the end, he had just deceived me with sweet words. Just as Jack was about to confront my father again, a loud shattering sound of glass shocked the whole venue. We all turned to see what had happened. There stood Jack's father, his hand shaking uncontrollably, and his face turning an alarming shade of blue. In stark contrast to Jack's demeanor, his father had a look of sheer panic on his face. "Idiot! Stop it, Jack. Don't you dare cross that man," he shouted. "What are you scared of? We could crush this little company in an instant and toss it aside, right?" Jack mocked. In response, his father shouted in a trembling voice, "That gentleman is one of our major shareholders." "Huh? This old guy?" Jack, with a baffled look, alternated his gaze between his own father and mine. While my father's company was indeed small in scale, he had started it himself and received compensation such as executive remuneration and dividends from stocks. Moreover, he held stocks in companies other than his own, and if he sold them, he would have assets amounting to several $100 million. Among these stocks were those of the company owned by Jack's father. That's why my father, as a major shareholder, had the right to influence the company's management policies. When Jack learned this fact, he was stunned and blurted, "So did you tell me to date Sarah because you wanted to get your hands on her father's wealth?" "It's more than that," his father replied, seeking something greater out of this marriage but not telling Jack, who was full of himself. Jack's father had his eyes on my father's patents. He was currently paying a significant amount of money to my father's company to use that patent, but if Jack and I were to marry, he would no longer have to pay for it and could use it freely. "Patents? And you were told to date me? Jack, you never actually liked me." "What kind of nonsense is that? I'm the son of a major corporation CEO. If it weren't for my dad's request, I would never be with you." "What the hell? I truly loved you. Actually, I was supposed to be set up with a beautiful heiress. Instead, I've been putting up with a mediocre girl like you all this time. You should be grateful," Jack spat, knocking a flower from the table and scattering white petals everywhere. "Jack, please don't talk anymore," his father pleaded, pale as a ghost, trembling like he was seconds away from fainting. But that was understandable. His son wouldn't stop making remarks that would infuriate the last person he'd want to cross. "Shut up. It's all your fault, Dad." Just as a father-son argument was about to break out, my father's voice echoed once again. "That's enough." For a moment, the room fell silent. "Sarah, what are you going to do? Do you still want to marry this kind of man?" my father gently asked me. I quietly shook my head. "I can't be happy marrying this sort of man. A man who would treat me as a maid, trying to have me live on $50 for food every month. I just couldn't bear the thought of being with him. This is economic abuse, isn't it? Jack, I will sue you. I'm also going to annul our marriage, so be prepared for that." "What? Are you okay with being a divorcee?" "Well, you're going to be a divorcee too, so we might as well share the pain. I won't hold back anymore. Since I realized he had no love for me, I had completely lost feelings for him. I'd rather be a divorcee than be exploited under such ridiculous conditions." When I firmly stated my decision, my father also nodded in agreement. "That's probably for the best. As for your company, we will take appropriate measures. I wonder what will happen to your company from now on." When my father said this with a terrifying look on his face, it seemed Jack finally realized the gravity of the situation. He fell on his knees, begging for mercy with his father. "Our foolish son has been terribly rude. We promise to educate him well to avoid any future incidents. Please just don't cancel the marriage." Sarah was wrong. "Please forgive me. I'll let you do as you like with housework, childcare, and work. I won't limit your food expenses anymore. You can even hire a maid and relax at home if you want. We can hear all about your grievances in court. Dad, let's go home." I apologized to all the guests and returned all their gift money. Then I canceled the wedding. Afterwards, thanks to the skilled lawyer hired by my father, we managed to sue Jack in court. The cause of our broken engagement was determined to be Jack's fault, and he was forced to bear the full cost of our wedding fees. Plus, I also received compensation. Moreover, because he failed miserably at securing a convenience marriage and humiliated his father by having him beg on his knees, he was abandoned by his parents. There was no way he would ever sit in the CEO chair again. Out of desperation, Jack caused a ruckus at work and got in trouble with the police. From what I've heard, he got fired in the end. He's become worthless, aimlessly living life with no solid job. Of course, there's no chance for him to ever get set up with an heiress anymore. As a result of deceiving me and getting abandoned, his life became miserable. As for me, I ended up being a divorcee, but my father introduced me to a sincere young employee working at his company. I'm currently dating him, and we're planning on getting married next year.